Hello there. My name is Sam Maihack, and I am pastor here at. Excuse me. Wait just a moment. Hi, that's better. I don't much like wearing them either, but in this particular day and time, this is one of the ways that we love one another and love our neighbors by wearing our mask. With the hopes and obviously the prayers that this will enable each of us to do our part in helping to slow the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Here in the church facility, we continue to practice wearing our masks as well as other social distancing guidelines. I encourage you to do so as well and to honor and respect those who might be vulnerable to this disease, even if we feel that we personally are not necessarily at risk. As I started to mention, my name is Sam Maihack. I am pastor here at Mariner United Methodist Church in Spring Hill, Florida. And as I'm making this recording, it is about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday, August the 13th. During these midweek devotionals, we have been taking a look at excerpts from the life of the biblical character, the Old Testament biblical character of Moses. In addition to that, in our live worship services on Facebook on Sunday mornings, we are making our way through the Old Testament story of Ruth. And if you are a part of our email Bible study group, we are going through the book of 1 John in the New Testament. I trust that these opportunities to connect with one another and to connect with God are some encouragement to you and are better enabling you to walk with God during these unprecedented times. As I mentioned, these particular midweek devotionals, we're making our way through the life of Moses. And so we're going to look at another excerpt from his life today. Just to bring us up to speed, Moses, if you may remember, was God's chosen leader to lead his children out of slavery and into the promised land. And so one day when Moses was walking in the desert, God appeared to him in the form of a burning bush and told Moses that he was the chosen one, the instrument through which God was going to provide the human leadership to lead his children out of slavery. Moses, however, did not think it was such a good idea, and he came up with one excuse after another as to why someone else would be much better suited for this particular mission. Finally, Moses relents and agrees to go to Egypt with the promise that God would go with him and that in addition to God's presence with him, God provided a companion to work with him in the person of his brother named Aaron, who apparently had some gifts in the area of speaking and preaching that Moses felt were inadequate in himself. And so Moses and Aaron head down to Egypt. They go to Pharaoh's court, and there in the court, they inform Pharaoh that they have come and they are going to lead the children of Israel, the slaves of Egypt, out of slavery and back to the promised land. Needless to say, Pharaoh is not particularly excited about this idea. I can imagine at some level he was probably laughing either out loud or silently as these two gentlemen just summarily announced that they're taking his slaves away. And so the Pharaoh responds to Moses and Aaron's announcement by summoning the leaders of the slave to also come to his court for an announcement. At which point, the Pharaoh, the king, informs the leaders of the slaves that not only is he not going to allow them to leave Egypt, not only is he not going to honor their request to go and worship the one true God in the wilderness, but he's going to make life even harder for them. You see, to this point, one of the primary tasks of the slave was to make bricks for the enormous building projects that Pharaoh had going in different places. But one thing that Pharaoh's officers and army and others would provide for the slaves was the straw necessary to mix with the mud to make the bricks. And so as he calls the leaders of the slaves to come into her presence, he informs them that no longer will his people provide the straw that is needed to make the bricks. The slaves are going to have to do that part of the work themselves as well. Also, not only will they have to find and use the straw to make the bricks, But Pharaoh demands that they not reduce by any amount whatsoever the number of bricks that they are producing. In other words, Pharaoh offers an almost impossible task and an impossible burden on the already overly burdened slaves. This is where we pick up the story today, and we read these words. The Israelite overseers realized that they were in trouble when they were told, "You are not to reduce the number of bricks required of you each day." So when they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And they said, "May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us an obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." In response to that, Moses goes back to God and he says these words, "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on his people, and you have not rescued your people at all." Well, now aren't those the most encouraging, inspiring, helpful words you've ever heard? I mean, just what you want to hear during a pandemic, right? You want to hear a story of a group of people living in slavery whose life literally goes from bad to worse in our story. Yeah, I know. Does not seem initially all that encouraging. But I would like to offer to you a couple of thoughts from it today that maybe will help you sustain faith during this time. And the first of those is these. Despite what the circumstances were, despite Pharaoh's initial response to the announcement that Moses and Aaron have arrived to lead the slaves to freedom, and despite the difficulties that brought upon the slaves and upon Moses and Aaron, Moses was exactly still in the right place. I mean, Moses had to be thinking, what gives here? I finally relent to go to Egypt. I finally agree to do this job. God had promised me that he's going to use me not to make life harder on the slaves, but to lead them to freedom. And all I've done by announcing to Pharaoh what God told me to say to him was more burden and more difficulty. I believe that reflects a note of reality in our story. And it's a note of reality in your story and my story as well, because sometimes reality is, even when we're in the right place, right in the center of God's will, things seem to get better. Things seem to get worse before they get better. That's a reality of living, and it reminds me that the biblical stories, the biblical accounts, the biblical characters were real people who experienced real difficulty and experienced at times the same level of confusion and difficulty when it came to where they fit in God's plan as you and I do. I know right now, some of us are probably wondering, what went wrong? Or what did I do wrong? When in reality, we're just living by faith in a time that's very, very difficult. And in some ways, for many of us during these days, has gotten worse before it got better. And yet from Moses' story, we know from the background story, we know from the story of the burning bush and the context that Moses was exactly where he needed to be, despite the difficulty of the circumstances, and despite the fact that at least initially the Israelites weren't particularly pleased with his announcement. The other thing that I would like to point out from this story is this. Not only was Moses in the right place, he did the right thing. What do I mean by that? Well, he took his confusion and he took his complaint and he took them to the Lord in prayer, where he says the words that we looked at a moment ago. "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? For ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on his people, and you have not rescued your people at all." I would suggest to you that when we are struggling to understand the world around us, particularly when the world around us is providing unprecedented difficulty, it is okay to go to God and express our confliction. It is good to confess our questions. It is good to confess our confusion. You see, prayer takes many forms. We usually think of prayer as a specific request, something that we want God to do. Sometimes prayer takes the form of simply admitting our confusion. Sometimes prayer takes the form of a lament. Sometimes prayer takes the form of simply coming clean with God about what's really going on in our hearts. And so while Moses is definitely confused and conflicted over the situation and the response of both Pharaoh and the Israelites, his active response to that is to take that confusion and to take that confliction and take it to the Lord in prayer, which he does so. God answers that prayer, and God tells him he is still at work. And in the answer to Moses' complaint, he offers these final words of hope. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. You see, the story does end with a note of hope. And despite the circumstances and the immediacy of the difficulty, the promise of God continues to come through. And Moses, encouraged by those words, stands and goes and continues on with his mission. I hope these words are of some measure of encouragement and help to you today in your own walk of faith. It's my pleasure and my incredible blessing to serve as pastor here at Mariner Church. And just a reminder that God loves you so very much.